This is an audio test for the April 21st Board of Education meeting. The board entered into executive session at 6 o'clock, and they will reopen to open session at 7 p.m. to start the live meeting. Again, this is just an audio test for the April 21st Board of Education meeting. Again, this is just an audio test for the April 21st Board of Education meeting.
Hello, Krista.
Hi, Greg. How are you doing?
Good.
I think we have everybody with us. And as it is 7:03, if we can reconvene our meeting to open session. The board has been in executive session since 6 o'clock to discuss multiple personnel matters. We could please start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Go through introductions for the board tonight. We have Meredith Moriarty, Willow Bear, Christine Beck, Jonathan Fishbein, Wendy Sampson, Chris Meyer, and myself, Holly Dellenbaugh. And from administration, Jody Monroe, Dave Hurst, Judy Kehoe, and Kathy Johnston. First up is our approval of minutes. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the April 14th, 2021 regular board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. Next, our reports. First up, our superintendent's report.
Thank you. Tonight I have a few student spotlights I'd like to highlight. We had our speech and debate team do very well. We had 8 students from the high school who qualified for the New York State Forensics League Championship, and 4 of them also qualified to compete in a national league, one of the country's most prestigious speech and debate tournaments. So congratulations to Maxwell Gold, Matthew Connolly, Justin Dong, and Daniel Joe, Evan Ho, Ona Ko-Knight, Omni Brewer, and Grace Trapowski. The state tournaments will be held online from April 23rd through the 25th. And this is the 3rd consecutive year that Bethlehem students have qualified for the state championship tournament. This year, the Bethlehem High School students competed in 13 tournaments during the regular season, and we also hosted our own tournament for the 2nd consecutive year, where over 40 competitors participated. So congratulations to all of our students. Our Science Olympiad team, A, whose members achieved their season goal of a top 10 performance at the New York State Science Olympian Tournament on April 10th. I'd like to congratulate them. The team finished 9th place out of nearly 70 teams, and I know they are looking for recruits for the coming year. So congratulations to them. And I'd also like to congratulate a middle school student, Kristen Burns, who's a social studies teacher there, had encouraged her students to enter the 25th annual Black History Month Creative Expressions Contest. And one of her students, a budding poet named Johanna Radcliffe, she wanted to tell a story about a businessman, Alfred Kroll, a little differently. And she chose to write a poem, and it is on our website, about ice cream and his invention, which was in 1896. He patented a one-handed ice cream scoop with a push feature that has been used for generations. So as I said, I'd like to congratulate Johanna, and you can read her poem on our website for this. So congratulations to all of our students. It's nice to see that even during these times that we're still competing and having fun and doing well. So thank you. That's my report for this evening.
Anybody have any questions for Jody? Next is our board report. First, I just wanted to let everybody know that I hear tickets for the high school musical will be going on sale on April 26th. It will be streamed. They're recording it, and then you buy a ticket for the stream of the recording. And the streaming will be, I think, the weekend of May 6th, 7th, 8th. So look for that information if you would like some theatrical entertainment. In addition, this morning, I virtually attended the NYSBA policy workshop that they held, which was interesting. They were talking about some COVID-related policies, both now and possible changes going forward. And one particularly interesting note that they made that they said they're going to be keeping an eye on are birth rates across the state. Because I guess there are two varying predictions about where things are going to go in the future. Either the pandemic is going to cause a baby boom or possibly a baby bust. So they recommended that all the districts continue to keep an eye on their population growth in their area. But it was interesting. I had not thought about that pandemic effect. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that today is Administrative Professionals Day. And I wanted to say a thank you to all of our admin professionals in the district, but I particularly wanted to say thank you to Brittany for all of her hard work for the board and her able assistance, especially with all of our virtual meetings during the course of the COVID times. So thank you so much, Brittany. Does anybody have anything else? There she is. There's her face.
Hold up the baby. Hold up the baby.
Does anybody have anything else that they would like to add? Hearing no one, let's move on to our, we have two presentations this evening. Our first presentation about a potential facilities improvement project.
So this will clearly be the most exciting presentation of the evening because we've been working so hard on this behind the scenes for quite some time. So, one of the ways that we measure our environment in the school district is really, how well do we maintain our facilities? That's really going to be the foundation of what we provide to our students. So is it a safe, clean, bright, conducive environment to their studies? And are both the things that are visible and then the things that are not so visible maintained appropriately? So we do strive to keep the condition levels consistently high, and it is something that we monitor and work towards. And as we go through trying to design our projects, we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to prioritize the key projects that need to be worked upon. So at our March 3rd meeting, we did start this kickoff of the first public discussion on that. We noted that we have just completed in December the $32 million project that we started in 2016. And as we know, these projects take quite some time because you have to go through the review and the approval process. There's a state ed review timeline. And then, of course, you have to bid everything, do the work, monitor it. And you're typically looking at close to a 4-year time span for that. So the way that we start all of these projects is to get the updated, it's called a 5-year facilities plan, which our architects help us prepare. They work with district staff and they go around and assess the conditions of everything. And their plan includes close to $47 million worth of projects, which is typical that there is more listed on there. There are high priority, medium priority, and low priority tasks. So working with the recommendations from our architects, we identified the condensed list of the highest priority projects, and that currently is at about $35 million, and that represents close to 170 different elements of work, again, spread throughout the entire district. Our architects are on the call this evening with us. We have Drew Jones and Krista Haneker from Ashley McGraw. So if there are certain questions that we can't answer, they are available to hop in and answer those for you. So I think the best news about going into this project is that we are so well positioned to begin this. Again, knowing the cycle and what is coming up, we have been planning for this work and then setting aside any surpluses that we've had in each year leading up to this point. And as we had talked about at the last meeting, we expect to have anywhere between $15 to $17 million worth of funds within our capital reserves. And what that does is it allows us not to issue debt for that work. We essentially pay cash for the work that we're doing. So with our building aid, our current building aid ratio is approximately 70%. And New York State looks at the total costs for the projects that they approve. And then we receive aid on about 70% of those total costs. So once they make those approvals, what they do is they help align the building aid over a 15-year timeline typically with the amount of debt service payments over that 15-year period. So that's how districts essentially are able to do $35 million worth of work and have it be a relatively small impact on the overall budget because your local share is typically smaller. So for us, it's about 30%, and it is spread out based on the financing term. So in this case, because we have so much money available within the reserves, we're going to have a much lower debt service cost for principal and interest payments on this bond. The building aid is going to come in at the full amount of the eligible costs. So essentially, by using those reserves, that becomes our funding source for the local 30% share of this project. So there should not be any impact within the budget that affects taxpayers in a negative way because we're able to draw on these reserves. So that's a very fortuitous position to be in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg Nolte, who is going to start to get into the project scope elements for you.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Good evening, everyone. As she mentioned, gave a brief overview of the project at my budget meeting in March. So tonight we're going to start talking a little bit more about specifics of the project and some of the highlights of the project. Slide. Okay, so I have two pie charts because who doesn't like pie? But so the first one actually breaks down the proposed $35.9 million project by elements, and we actually have 6 elements. The largest being site work, and this is primarily because of the proposal of a synthetic turf field at the high school. Another part of the site work is a lot of resurfacing of the high school and middle school parking lots and the track as well. And that takes up about 29% of the project. The second largest element, which is like the exciting part of the project, is the building renovation and the educational space improvements. That's about 26%, and that includes a number of items, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, such as the middle school auditorium, the middle school LMC, the fax rooms at the middle school, some digital tech rooms renovations that we'd like to do there, some renovations of Gym A, some of the shops there, some kitchen work, restrooms at some of the schools, and some transportation administrative office renovations. And that's just to name just a few of them. We have building envelope, and that primarily is because of roofing, replacement roofing that we have to do. That comes in at about 18% of the pie. And then MEP stuff, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing items. That's because we need to replace some boilers at a couple of our elementary schools. Slide. The second pie chart actually breaks down the project by building. And just understand that the development of the project was based upon the condition and the needs that were identified at each building. So although I'm hesitant to create a building that represents, or a slide that represents the cost by building, it does give a sense of distribution of the need and the equity across the district. Okay, so again, just to emphasize, I'm going to talk about a couple of the highlighted projects and some of the more sizable projects. It doesn't mean that one project is more important than the other. I just wanted to touch upon a number of them, and you'll see potentially the needs that have been identified and the deficiencies that were talked about. So let's just jump right into the middle school auditorium. Second to the synthetic turf, this is the next largest component of the bond. We met with the auditorium is as you know, originally constructed in 1932. It's a very large meeting area for the middle school itself. There has been a mishmash of improvements that we have completed over the years on the auditorium itself. It seats about 672, and that includes about 200 in the balcony. And it's used by other schools. I think some of the elementaries use it for lip sync and some larger concerts and things like that. So the project would include pretty much an overhaul of the space. It would include new rigging, stage rigging, painting, electrical upgrades, seating, lighting, audio, and ADA accessibility. So the needs, we had a number of conversations, I would say, over the past year with the principals, Dave Norman, and other stakeholders, and they kind of identified a number of needs that are pretty much listed and identified on this slide. Basically, as I indicated, that the auditorium is going to get pretty much a full overhaul within its existing four walls. There's no mention of making this auditorium any bigger. So picture says 1,000 things here. So I just thought I'd throw a couple of these up there just to get you a sense. I know a lot of you have seen them. This is, of course, a view looking at the stage. You'll notice a lot of the inconsistent lighting in some of the dark areas within the space. The view on the left is the balcony, and on the right you can see the front edge of the curved stage along with the coral risers, and you can see the space that is kind of lost behind the risers, especially when the risers are there. So it's a tight space with this configuration. Another aspect of the bond is renovations to the library media center. Again, we've had many conversations over the past year with the principals, the tech director, and other stakeholders. And the goals of the middle school LMC are somewhat similar to the high school LMC. You know, we want to create a more flexible learning environment at this point. We want to create innovative areas for teachers and students to promote collaborative learning. We want to reconfigure the space to make a help desk more serviceable for the students. And of course, with any LMC nowadays, we're going to have extensive upgrades to technology within the space. So here are some interior views of the LMC. Note the wooden cubbies and the row of these very, very, very heavy book cases that makes pretty much the space very inflexible. The photo on the left actually shows the entrance to the LMC. It has an extremely large circulation desk, oversized circulation desk that pretty much takes a valuable student space. And as you walk into the left-hand side is what we have created is our student help desk area, which is the photo on the right-hand side. Not very friendly and doesn't really say, hey, if you got a problem with your Chromebook, come and come and we'll help you out. So that is some of the goals with this renovation project to make that much more accessible. Another aspect that we've actually talked about that I've had to deal with for years is the middle school fax room. And of course, fax stands for Family and Consumer Science rooms. Presently right now, we have 2 classrooms on 2 different levels of the schools. There is insufficient space for the kitchen and the classroom to be together. All right. And it's which is proven to basically be very difficult to create an effective kind of teaching space. And now, of course, with microwaves and hot plates and stoves and griddles, it has taxed our electrical distribution in those areas, and it's kept going. I'm very busy trying to figure out how to get a circuit there and not blow breakers in the middle of a classroom. So we, again, for this aspect of the project, we had a number of conversations with the principals, with the fact supervisor, with the teachers, and we came up with a great resolution, which I'm real excited about. So we would have 1 shared kitchen, and this would be upstairs, with 7 student stations, and in each station would be about 4 students each, okay? And a teaching station. We have this at the high school, and we actually have a camera over the top of it. So with a large class of 26 kids or something like that, we'll actually have a TV behind. So if you can't see the demonstration of what the teacher's doing, you can look on the screen, and it's worked out very effective at the high school. So we would have the shared teaching or this shared kitchen area, and then 2 separate proximal classrooms, all on that first floor level. Here's some pictures. The picture on the left is room 150 upstairs, and downstairs next to the cafeteria is the is the 1 fax room downstairs. So while we were looking at the fax room, we also evaluated the functions of the old computer labs, and we talked about in the desires of basically creating more of a collaborative area, kind of like a makerspace of what we did at the high school LMC. And we would utilize these 3 classrooms and create what we'll call digital tech rooms. And they would have interactive whiteboards, a 3D printer, flexible furniture, and potentially a partition dividing the room. So if we want separate classrooms, we could create those. All right, I mentioned earlier is the largest part of the bond proposal, and that being a synthetic field. And this would replace the grass field, which we call actually number 2. And that's on the fence field that you can actually see from Delaware Avenue just outside of Ewing. Okay, so this is not the stadium field, okay, which is along Van Dyke. All right, and the project would include drainage, bleachers, lights, a scoreboard, a small non-cooking concession area, a small press box storage area, and some safety control netting and a mid-curtain that will allow you to have a number of practices on the field at once, and of course perimeter fencing for help with security and crowd control. It would be used for physical education classes, and of course, athletic practices and games. In talking to Len Keys, who will be speaking more about this, we would house at least soccer, field hockey, and lacrosse, and that's about 5 total teams, both girls and boys. And although football has their own stadium, like I've mentioned earlier, they could practice or have a game on this field if need be, okay? Of course, we would improve ADA accessibility to this field as well. So this is a panoramic view on top of Ewing, actually on the roof of Field 2. Delaware Avenue is actually located to the left of this, of the left of the picture. So I thought I would turn it over to Len, who actually is much more passionate about and lives with the pros and cons and all the concerns of our grass field. So Len, I will turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Greg. Good evening, everybody. And thank you for letting me just kind of talk a few minutes about this. So several of you have heard me discuss just some of the concerns and some of the issues without having our own synthetic field. Obviously, it limits us on where our teams can play. We have a large number of programs, a lot of depth of programs. Many of our modified programs do play up at the high school, such as this spring, which we're starting this Sunday. Our boys and girls modified lacrosse teams or modified softball teams, all up at the high school. Obviously, with upstate weather, and whether it be later in the fall, as well as the normal spring seasons, we are always, dealing with wet conditions. A lot of time and plans have gone into field 2 over the years. Again, that's that fenced soccer field, lacrosse field that that Greg has been referring to try to improve the drainage, to try to make it a drier surface. And unfortunately, it really just has never taken all the variety of methods we've tried. So the snow melt, the frost that just naturally accumulates, and then as things warm up, rises. So we're talking really the month of March in the springtime is pretty much one that's either spent renting other synthetic turf fields or inside, which of course these sports are not supposed to be played inside. Even during the season, when we're talking in the middle of fall, middle of spring, if we have rain for a day or two, that particular field is really not usable for at least 2 to 3 days, which of course means we're having to move varsity games to sub-varsity fields. And from the 2016, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19 year, we kept track in my office, and it was just about 70% of all varsity boys and girls soccer and boys and girls lacrosse games had to be moved off of the varsity field and played on lower level fields just because they were drier. And that includes playoff games. The teams work hard to host playoff games, obviously gives us an advantage, but then we have to move the playoff games either to a neutral site or to lower level fields. Next slide, please. So definitely a lot of benefits and advantages to having it. As you'll see in a coming slide there, I believe 11 of the 15 teams in our league already have it or have approved it or in the middle of kind of where we, are the varying stages. So obviously it's something that more and more, teams in our league have. But of course, physical education classes will be able to utilize this, particularly going deeper into fall, obviously as long as the air temperature, stays at a safe rate. And obviously, we have those temperatures. Also intramurals, our intramural programs are growing more and more like Ultimate Frisbee. That gives them, another place to utilize. By increased playability, basically meaning that there's no rest time needed when we're using synthetic turf. Obviously, we could have back-to-back practices. And then, of course, once our school teams are out of the way because their day is over, we can then open it up to community groups, youth groups. So, currently we are not renting out any of our varsity level fields. So down the line, as you see, it can also be a revenue producer for the district. As I mentioned, really will increase the flexibility for our PE program. It'll reduce the numbers in gymnasiums. Obviously, just look at the scenario we've had this year with the distancing between students due to the pandemic. Obviously, in the fall, we'll still be probably dealing with some of these issues. It would be wonderful if we had something like that where we can spread out those sections and really, have more room. Fewer injuries because you're dealing with an even playing surface. Obviously in grass fields, chunks of grass come out, you have just the natural deterioration over a season, and particularly when it's wet, one misstep, you plant your foot on a wet surface and it goes out from under you, significant cause of lower extremity injuries, ACL injuries, all your various knee components, MCL, ACL, and of course ankles, things of that nature. Obviously, with a synthetic field, you're going to be using a lot less manpower. Our groundskeepers, other maintenance costs, associated with it. And then, of course, the environmentally, we're not running sprinklers all the time and obviously eliminating the use of fertilizer and pesticides. Next slide. So that is a pretty comprehensive list right now. On the left, you see the schools that play within our league. And actually, there's one missing from that list: Burnt Hills, Ballston Lake, 3 years ago had a beautiful synthetic turf facility as well. Guilderland is slated to vote later in the year, obviously about, shortly after our community vote. And actually Christian Brothers Academy, where we do have some of our students do go there, and often it's due to athletics. They are announcing it publicly at May 17th and will be breaking ground May 18th. So that'll be another one that'll just basically leave us, Ballston Spa and Averill Park as the only members of the Suburbans that currently do not have one. And then on the right, you see obviously smaller conferences, Foothills, Colonial. There's even a couple of Western athletic conferences that have it as well. I think that's pretty much it on the synthetic fields, Greg.
Okay, so switching gears, just a couple more highlighted projects. Jimmy, renovation. We're looking to basically renovate kind of the last gym in our district. Everybody else has had pretty much full rehabs. It would include basketball hoops, bleachers, padding, painting, and acoustics. This is a gym that basically you see as soon as you walk in the front of the high school. So there's going to be some level of playground improvements at each elementary school. Okay, we will be adding some equipment because we've, as you recall, over the past number of bonds, we've changed out a lot of the old wooden structures. Okay, we have some equipment that we would install at Ellesmere and Hammergrill. One thing that has come up is providing some shade structures or pavilions at Eagle, Glenmont, and Slingerlands. This would also be used for some of our outdoor classroom activities. We've purchased a number of tents that we're putting up and taking down. This would be more of a permanent structure, at least at this point. And that's it for that slide. This is just one of the examples of a shade structure / pavilion. This isn't at any of our schools. Project also includes some kitchen renovations at Slingerlands and Hammergrill. We would be replacing old equipment. We'd be looking at the layout and the efficiency of the kitchen layout and dealing with the food service director on that. We'll also look at how the students access the kitchen and flow through the kitchen because our time periods for lunch are usually very, very quick. And it's also been identified that we do need some improvements in the actual cafeteria at Slingerlands. This just happens to be Hammergrill. And I'm actually looking at the right slide is from the front lobby, looking through the glass into the kitchen. Transportation. The front of transportation is where the admin offices are. The insulation and the windows are poor. The metal siding is kind of deteriorated. It's kind of like an old metal trailer type of building addition there. There's actually 4 offices up there that are served by 4 different HVAC units, heating, ventilating, air conditioning units. The space has kind of evolved over the many years with the growth of the department. Presently, O&M is actually working to consolidate some of the admin services in there. We're taking part of the director's office and dividing it so one of the admins can come from dispatch up into the area here. So it's undersized and doesn't really, it's kind of insufficient for the needs of today. All right. The photograph on the left actually shows the hallway of the admin area. There was a very large server at the end of this hallway, and Ray and his group actually consolidated that and kind of hung it on the wall, as you can see in the upper left there, because the copier has to go out into the hallway here. So there's a lot of improvements that could be done here just to make the space much more effective. And the proposal would actually be squaring off on the right-hand side where this Suburban is. We would actually just square off the building right there to give them a little more space for offices. So I couldn't finish the presentation without touching upon some of the boring maintenance items. So as I mentioned, there's a good amount of roof replacements kind of going on here at high school, middle school, Ellesmere, and Hammergrill. All are beyond their warranty period, which ranges anywhere from 15 to 25 years. Boiler replacements at Glenmont, Hammergrill, and Transportation all are basically beyond their life as per our ASHRAE standards. They're about probably a 1987 vintage. Okay, we're going to be upgrading some fire alarm systems, hardening some entrances at Glenmont and Hammergrill, and improving and upgrading our camera system at a number, actually at all the schools. Just some pictures here. This just happens to be a Hammergrill roof. You can kind of see some of the puddles. That indicates that it's not draining appropriately. Next slide. Just boiler picture at Hammergrill. The main office at the high school was another one where we're looking at some small renovations to it. The goal is, I guess, to make the office more functional, efficient, and inviting for students. When you come in the high school, you don't see the entrance at all to the main office. It's kind of like down the hallway and to the left. So that would be one of the goals of the bond as well. There is about $2.1 million of the project that is for technology upgrades at all the schools. It includes numerous wireless access points, upgrades to the telephone system, and some switch replacements. Many of these are eligible for a federal program called E-rate funding, which would be used to reduce the bond amount. I think the E-rate is about 40%, which would help basically reduce the bond amount. So touching upon the project timeline, which I mentioned back in March, we are looking from now until July, August to refine the scope, to have public presentations, to have some outreach in hopes to solidify the actual scope and have the board approve the scope at the August 11th meeting. And with that comes various resolutions, and a seeker resolution that as well would have to be part of that. We would then have the vote with the public on the 28th, which satisfies a 45-day notice. And then once we get and hopefully have approval, we get into project design, which will take us to about May of 2022. And then we submit it to SED, and it'll sit in there for approximately 9 months. And then we're hoping that January, February, we get approval and get it out to bid. So we can basically award contracts by the spring of 2023. Construction phase would pretty much go for about 2 years or so till about December of 2024. So it's a simpler timeline to what we experienced with the 2016 bond. So we will continuously update the website. We will post the 5-year facilities plan on it. Next slide. So at this point, is there any specific or additional information the board is looking for as we move ahead and possibly have additional presentations?
I have a few questions, Greg. First question that I had, I think with COVID on my mind, did you look at all at whether we need to make any improvements to ventilation in any of our buildings?
So all of our system's meter exceeds the standards for ventilation. Presently, right now, we are using a different filter. We're using a MERV 13 filter because of some recommendations of the state. So I don't, I'm not aware of any additional improvements that we could do to help with that.
Okay, great. I just was thinking that, if we're going into buildings to do work, then if it was something that needed to be done, might as well think of it at the same time.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, transportation, we would be replacing that HVAC system. The middle school auditorium would have an improved ventilation and air conditioning system associated with that as well. So that's much more specific. I mean, we can change the parameters of our ventilation system through our energy management system as life, as things allow or direct us to. So.
Okay. Len, I had a couple questions about the turf field, and one is, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, I'm wondering what we pay kind of on an annual basis to rent space when we can't use our own fields.
Right. Generally speaking, that is not a district expense. It's typically, prior to this year, obviously, boys and girls soccer programs or field hockey programs that will typically go out on their own. We don't generally have a turf budget code. This year, obviously, with moving sports that are generally played in the fall to we have been starting to get some of the invoices, and we're going to be close to about $14,000 for the month of March this year, and that was between AFRAMS and 3 other facilities that we needed to rent. So yeah, that would be the cost piece on that.
And I know, I've read about, and I remember it's come up before, some health concerns relating to turf fields, specifically with respect to knee injuries or exposure to PFAs, that kind of thing. I didn't know if that may not be something you can speak to right now, but is that something that you've been looking into? Is that outdated information?
Yeah, I think, well, as far as injuries go, it's actually quite the opposite. I would love to see any information on more injuries on an artificial turf field, because it's actually quite the opposite, because it provides a stable environment. As far as the PFAs, that's a great question. And it's something that typically came up, more about a dozen years ago. As most of you know, I'm from Long Island, and my last school had a turf field, and it took us some time to get through it. And we went through a lot of studies, but it's also good to know that there are other options. The big concern is the rubber fill, the recycled tires, which are those black little pellets you might see. There are other alternatives. So if it was something that the community, the board was not comfortable with, one example is a caulk. Literally, think of a wine cork. That cork fill is one that has been used in other schools that chose that alternative. I believe it's slightly more costly, but was something that allayed the concerns that the communities had. But that seems to be something that's really become a much less concern. I will tell you, as the father of 2 kids who are very active, as you'd imagine, in sports, our kids are playing on turf fields constantly all over the place. So I think it's just become part and parcel of participating in athletics in this time period in this region.
Thanks.
What is the safety concern between tire, which I have some thoughts on, and cork?
Just over the years, there have been concerns that the use of recycled crumbled rubber from the tires might be carcinogenic. There have been, stories about that over the years. It seemed to be much more, a decade plus ago, you heard about it a lot. I don't really hear those concerns a lot now. And obviously, just when I go to state association meetings and things of that nature, I talk to a lot of vendors, and as you'd imagine, I'm always asking questions about synthetic fields, for the possibility of us getting one in the future. And there are, this other alternative that was introduced about 4 or 5 years ago, the cork, which I guess the concerns are less regarding, possible carcinogens.
You're cutting out a little bit, Len.
Like the last couple of sentences.
I don't know.
about
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say, we have 2 of our architects on here who I think probably have worked on synthetic fields in several districts. I don't know if you have any information about the concerns that Holly had raised.
We have worked on synthetic fields with other districts. I can say that this concern has not directly come up with those districts, but we do have a landscape architect on our team who does this work regularly, and we can provide more information to the district on alternatives here, whether they're more than cork, whether there are other options, whether there are manufactured options instead of recycled rubber, and what the real health concerns have proven to be, considering that the recycled rubber has been used as fill since turf field was invented. So we can come back with more information there. I'd love to tell you it's not a problem, but unfortunately it's not my exact wheelhouse, but I have the right person for that and I can get back to you.
What I'd specifically like to know is, at the point in time that turf field has to be replaced, what are the costs of disposing the rubber? Because right now, if you go to change tires and get rid of a tire, you have to pay a disposal cost for that tire. And I can only imagine how many tires are used, cut up and used for a large turf field. And the question is, what is the cost of disposing that material going to be, 10, 15, 20 years down the road? When, if we think about it, 20 years ago, I don't think we had a fee for disposing of tires.
Sure, understood. I can relay that to my designer and we can get back to you with those specifics.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And I would also appreciate some, if you have additional information about the, concerns I know that have been raised in the past about PFAs and off-gassing with respect to using those little rubber pellets.
Sure. Well, expect something shortly. I'll relay my information through Greg and Judy and Jody, and it'll all come back to you next time you meet, I would imagine.
Thanks.
Can I say something real quick, or?
Go ahead.
Okay, sure. No, I just want to say that I'm really excited about this project for several reasons. One, the middle school auditorium, if we fix it, it could be a beautiful, part of our district. I mean, it's got a lot of old charm to it, and it just needs some TLC. And I think if we do that, it could be a really nice a part of what we are as a community. Because I think it has the potential to be gorgeous. The Hammer Girl pictures, that looks like it was when I was there, and that was 30 years ago. So we desperately need, to work there. Because when I saw that picture of the cafeteria, I'm like, yeah, I stood right there and I know exactly where you are. So we need to do these updates. And then with the turf fields, 10 years ago, they were like a want, and now they're a need. They're a need, and I just think that, it's not about, this is for our varsity lacrosse team. No, it's for all the kids. It's for every PE class. It's for every community event that we have. And I just want people to, most people I think have changed their mindsets on this, but I'm sure there are holdouts. And it's just, I want people to understand that, I think that we're going to see districts that are comparable to, or are going to be adding second turf fields and third turf fields. So, this is something that everyone is going to want and need to have, So my only concern was just looking at Len. There appears to be a Boston Red Sox pennant behind him, and this is Yankee territory. So that was my only issue with the whole presentation on the turf fields.
My son. My son.
Well, your son has good company. My son as well.
I just had a couple quick questions. First of all, regarding the turf field, you mentioned that 5 different teams may be using it. How would you propose dividing time amongst those teams?
Well, as far as the 5 teams would use it as their home varsity field, just right now we have 4 varsity teams using it, and 2 of them are in the fall, the soccers, 2 of them are in the spring. So obviously you're only dealing with a couple of teams. As far as practices go, that would be a rotating basis. It also depends on the opponent you're playing, particularly at the varsity level. Some teams, sometimes coaches would prefer to practice on grass if they, for some reason, based on the person of the other team and things of that nature. Plus, the field's going to be used by every level, not just varsity. As far as, the home game field, though, that field 2 that we keep referring to, the fence field, is a varsity game field, and it's so infrequent that the varsity game field is actually used by the varsity.
Okay.
But, we would rotate it and things of that nature.
Okay, that's just, I wanted to make sure that it was equitably used in practice amongst all of the eligible teams.
Yep.
Also, you mentioned that there would be a new boiler and a new air conditioning system in the middle school. Do you have any plans regarding looking into different levels of efficiency? We're talking about new technologies and trying to save energy wherever possible. So if we're doing these new heating systems, have we thought about new types of technology, efficient technology?
Yes. Any of the boilers that we're putting in now, we don't have any more steam boilers. Everything is hydronic. Everything is water. Okay. And yes, we put in high efficiency boilers. We just did in the last project at the high school, at least at the high school. But yes, we would look at the size and what system would actually work out the best.
Okay. I would encourage, looking at even the most efficient technology, the newest thing, and see what kind of savings we could encounter there. Regarding the middle school auditorium, are we taking into account keeping the architectural integrity of the middle school auditorium? Everyone loves the windows and the detailing, and I want to make sure that we're not going to be losing any of that. Yes,
that's not even in question. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been mandated to us. We got to make it look nice, and it's not going to be a wholesale renovation like we saw for the high school.
Okay.
It's going to be more targeted to get new services and technology in there, but to maintain the great character that you have there. The ceiling plane in particular, the barrel vault underneath the balcony, and making the most of those windows in a space that usually doesn't want windows. So finding a way to have that wonderful feature and have a great performance space. So yeah, we've got all those things on our checkbox.
Great.
So very good.
And speaking of that, the new technologies in the middle school auditorium, are we going to be keeping in mind accessibility, any sort of new hearing accessibility, or any sort of those systems?
Yeah, we're planning to do a very similar system to the one that we did at the high school auditorium. And that's relatively typical for high schools and middle schools where we do this work. There were discussions during the last project of doing something more built in that would work in concert with cochlear implants or other hearing aid devices. But it was we made a determination along with the district to go a little more targeted route with individual equipment for individual people, and making sure that there were enough devices for all eventualities, and being able to rent more devices if needed.
Okay. So it wouldn't be something that was built into the system, is what you're saying?
It will. built into this. It will be built into the technology of the room. The technology that allows you to hear will be a device that is given to you, and then that connects to the larger technology system in the room. So it's not something where you've got a some kind of radio frequency coil built into the floor, which is another system that can be installed, but it's a little more targeted, and we feel, well, I'll use the royal we. We might have a broader footprint of people who need those devices, and the individual use devices tied to the larger system gave us the best flexibility for the high school, and we'd be doing the same thing for the middle school, or we're planning to do the same thing for the middle school.
Okay, great. And then finally, Greg, you mentioned the digital tech classroom at the middle school. What exactly would be going on there? What would we be using it for? Because, I'm thinking, well, all the students are walking around with their Chromebooks. They have their Chromebooks with them. So what do we need a classroom like that for?
The way it was expressed to me is that this would take place of our hard fixed computer, old computer labs. I'm not sure, Dave or Jody, if you could speak more to this, where we want to go. I think it was meant, and the intent was more for a collaborative maker space, flexible space that we could have a group of students in, and that they could have different types of instruction in there.
Right. Similar to the high school, there'd be the technology would consist of boards that the students could use as interactive boards to hook their Chromebooks up to, things of that nature, not like your old school computer lab. Meredith, you're correct. Students have the Chromebooks. The technologies would be more for being able to work in the small groups or in a large group setting and project what it is that you're working on to be able to share, similar to what's at the high school.
So different groups could reserve the room?
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Meredith, just one other thing, when we talked about the character of the middle school auditorium, it just has great character. Everybody, it's just a neat space. But one of the items that everybody agreed on getting rid of was the squeaky chairs. Okay, so you might see a little bit different chair in there than
I don't think anyone's going to miss that.
Greg, speaking of the seating, would the intent be to keep the seating layout as it is, or to change that?
So, Drew, you can maybe speak more to this, but we would maximize the seat layout. We would have to abide by the standards for ADA accessibility and the amount of seats that we provide. We talked about our control room. And I know we talked about the rake or the slope of the area that might have to be changed, or at least down in the pit, because it's not a very usable pit. So how does that all lay out? I think that time will tell. Drew, do you have anything more to add?
No, just that we did look into the possibility of refurbishing the seats and leaving them in place and doing the same layout, which, don't get me wrong, it's possible, but you're chasing after an old piece of equipment that was squeaky to begin with, and it's rather old to start with. Then there were more significant concerns that came up in our user group meetings with the users of the space, Dave Norman and the principal, and so on and so forth, where there's more need basically on the floor plate to do better work in the pit area where the coral risers are. There's more modifications that want to happen to the rake of the seating area, because it's actually steeper than ADA allows for a sloped ramp, which is a problem for accessibility. But more things started piling on to the project, which it needs. But refurbishing the seats really didn't fit with the goals. And as soon as we started talking about the rake of the slab there, keeping the seats as they were really wasn't going to be an option. And we will do the most efficient layout we possibly can. and we'll maximize the seating within current guidance. And also, I think if you remember the seats that used to be at the high school auditorium and the seats that you have now, part of the modernization is a little bit of widening of the seats so that people can be more comfortable in them, and providing a range of seat styles and widths. And that's going to be part and parcel of what we do here as well. And we work with consultants to make sure that we're maximizing the number of seats and maintaining sight lines as well as meeting current code.
Sure. So it sounds like we don't have a layout yet for exactly what it would look like, but we
not just yet.
Okay, but we would, I would assume that we would be losing some seating capacity just because some of those seats are, I mean, I'm thinking in particular that your last row in the balcony that you can't sit in if you are, well, have, I think, taller than 4 feet tall. But so I'm assuming that, you know, that's just something that we can anticipate, that there won't be as much seating.
That's absolutely correct. And again, we will do everything that we can to maximize the seating that we put back. And during design, there will be levers that we can collectively pull to maximize it more or maximize it less. Basically, playing with how many seats you have in certain widths can, you know, increase your count by, you know, 10 or 20 chairs one way or the other. And it's a conversation we can have with the district to tune it to where it needs to be, both for the function of the space, but also the comfort of the space.
And Holly, as I mentioned earlier, we met with a number of stakeholders, and it's not that we're done with them. If the project is approved, we're going to get back with them and have them involved throughout this process, so we fully understand exactly what they're looking for. And when we roll up our sleeves, we start designing it. We're going to come back with some ideas and concepts, and is this acceptable and that type of stuff, or this is why we had to do it this way. So we have buy-in from everybody. So,
and compared to the high school, those seats are how much smaller on average? I would imagine they're at least a half an inch to an inch smaller.
Yeah,
I was going to say 5 inches.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of the seats that we took out of the high school were in the 18 to 19 inch range. And a lot of the ones that we put back, the majority were over 20 inches. Mm-hmm. And again, we've got the same vintage chair ostensibly in the middle school. So we're dealing with similar widths. Great for middle school bodies, maybe not so much for all of us. But we're going to do the best that we can to make it as comfortable as possible. And again, maintain the seat count as high as we possibly can.
They seem like they're smaller than the high school a little bit, even before renovation.
Yeah, it's entirely possible.
It's kind of a small thing, but I feel like, didn't we just put a whole bunch of money into replacing the lighting in the middle school auditorium? Did I make that up?
I think what I heard just from yesterday's conversation with Jason Dashu is that I think that the theater group actually has purchased some lighting for the middle school auditorium, that as we get into this project, we should at least assess what they have purchased and not lose that, because they mentioned a lot of LED lightings and all that stuff. So I mentioned to Jason yesterday that I will involve my architects with that.
Perfect. I just didn't want to lose that investment.
Anybody else have any questions on this presentation? All right, hearing none, thank you for sharing all the information with us. And we will look forward to hearing some more and turn to our second presentation this evening, our update on the electric buses.
Thank you. Every day since our last meeting, we've been doing a little bit more to advance the details of this project. And it was interesting to see just on the news yesterday that the Vice President, Kamala Harris, was down visiting an electric bus manufacturer manufacturer in, I think it was North Carolina, and announcing additional federal monies coming towards this. So at the last meeting, we had talked about the momentum that seems to be building for all of these types of initiatives. And every day you hear something new. And I think this latest round of federal funding is intended to help benefit the future conversion of fleets for both school districts and for public transportation authorities. So again, exciting momentum. If you go to the next slide, we have really been exploring this whole feasibility from a request from the community to be pursuing this, and also with the support of the board. And we're really pleased with what we're seeing relative to these reduced diesel emissions. That certainly will be benefiting the community and ultimately the environment. We have, if you go to the next slide, the good news is that we have submitted our application to Nyserda for their New York Truck Voucher Incentive Program, or NITVIP program. And this is part of the VW settlement monies, where we're hoping to get the $200,000 grants for up to a maximum of 5 buses. That's all the program allows for. So we have submitted specifics to them as to which are the buses that we will be turning in. We have submitted details to them on what are the routes that are eligible for this funding. We have to actually transport, pick up or drop off students at locations that are within qualifying zones as part of the Nyserda grant terms. And we also have to hit 8,000 miles per year as a minimum with these buses. So all of those details of how we're planning to accomplish that are noted within that application to them. So they say that we should hear from them within 10 days of submitting this application. So right around May 3rd or so, we should have a decision, and we will know with certainty how many buses they will approve, whether it's all 5 or whether it might be less than that. So as soon as we hear, we will trumpet that word out to the community. And really, the future expansion of this is going to depend on how we do with that grant funding. They do have other programs, but there are lesser amounts. So for instance, they have the CMAQ program, which is $120,000 in grant funding, certainly goes a long way on the purchase of these buses. But I think if we get the additional federal dollars associated with that, that really is going to drive our ability to move forward with this in the future, knowing that the VW money is likely to be exhausted by that time. So we were specifically trying to hang on to our 2009 buses, because essentially you have to scrap those buses to pull them from the road so that there are no further diesel emissions coming from those buses. So assuming we get approved for 5 of the buses, we will scrap 5 of our 09 buses to meet those program requirements. And then the scrap value will probably be around $5,000 or so, depending on whatever the current market prices are for that. So we'll have 4 other 2009 buses. So we will need to make a decision whether there still will be some of this money left for the following year, in which case we'll hang on to those 09s. But if we get word that the funding, in fact, has been exhausted, then we would just have no further need for them, and we would auction them off at that point. So, we've done all that we can at this point relative to securing that funding. So now we're just going to patiently wait while we wait to hear from Nyserda on those grants. And then we will wait to see what the vote of the community is, whether they support the proposition that we have placed before them to enable the purchasing of these buses. If you go to the next slide, this was the cost comparison. And I tried to be conservative with these numbers. And the case that we made when we first had presented this was essentially over the life of the bus. While it's been reported that the total cost of ownership for the electric buses is far less than the diesel buses. We went conservative with the estimates and showed close to a break even. I actually had a call from a gentleman who is part of a nonprofit group who has done extensive studying of all of electric buses versus diesel and how to convert your fleets. And it was interesting because he almost good-naturedly was scolding me for being too conservative with my estimate, and indicated that based on the research that he's done, we actually could be seeing potentially even less than 30% in those operating costs, and had encouraged me to use 30%. I didn't want to change it this evening because I haven't actually worked through the information that he had shared with me on that. But just so you have an idea, if we went with that 30% range or estimate for the savings compared to what we pay now over the life of the diesel buses, it would actually be closer to a $6,400 savings with the diesel buses. So it's a range, but at worst we'll be breaking even, and at best we'll be saving more than is reflected on this slide. So the next big piece, and the second transportation related proposition, relates to the infrastructure necessary to charge up the buses. So I have to give a giant shout out to Greg Nolte and Nick and Sonia from O&M, because they have just been so helpful working through all of these elements. I don't speak amps or wattage, and they've been really working closely with National Grid and just helping to gather this information. What we have found is there are a number of different options for how to do this. So we have options with how National Grid might be installing their infrastructure. There are questions of, do you need to have a secondary installation put in, or whether you can use the existing service that we have. There are ranges of chargers that can be used. Some charge faster than others. You can pay a lot more money and get a very rapid charge of the buses. But in looking at our needs and the structure of these routes, we don't feel that we need to spend that money just to have the fastest and greatest charging option. So we are looking at the slower charge units. And again, the design of this is going to be done so that we have the ability to expand it in the future as we acquire these additional buses. So ultimately, we're going to be looking for the best value with the charging infrastructure and the charging stations. And we are comfortable that we're going to be coming in at or potentially below that 200,000. As I had mentioned previously, we also have some Nyserda funding that is available for this as well. So we think the net cost will be coming in below that, but wanted it to be conservative. If we get the funding from Nyserda, and if the voters approve the bus proposition, and then if they approve this second proposition for the infrastructure, that is the point then that we would start to actually be releasing the specifications for what it is that we're looking for. And we would need to be bidding out this work most likely, and or finding it off of state contracts, or being able to piggyback on another contract. But the good news is relative to the critical path for installing this, the buses will take probably around 10 months to be manufactured. So we have plenty of time to complete the infrastructure work prior to taking delivery of the electric buses. If you go to the next slide, I just put a copy of the visual from National Grid. This just gives you an idea of where, if we add that secondary service, what that would look like. So the red line and the green lines are Van Dyke. The black roof is the transportation facility. And of course, you can see all the bright yellow buses in the parking lot. The solid green lines are where the existing National Grid utility lines are. And in order to put in that second transformer, which is what's represented by that little, the little black box towards the bottom of the slide, is the connecting point. So National Grid would need to extend the existing lines and get to that little black box. The lines, the solid red line represents an above ground line. The dotted line on the opposite side of the bypass, further connecting down to the green power lines, would represent underground cables. And this is something that in National Grid's conversations with O&M, they indicated that this would be something that they would love to do for the broader community, because this would help them meet their existing service needs. And this portion of the work would not be paid by the district. It would be paid by National Grid because it benefits the broader community and helps them address some reliability issues relative to this section of their network. So the blue dotted line is where the district's cost would start to kick in if we go this route. So there would have to be an underground line connecting from the black box over to point number 1, which would be the transformer. And then that would be the connecting point for the initial round of buses. And then ultimately we would be able to expand that on that dotted green line down to point number 2. So this is just one of the proposed options that we're looking at right now. There are a few other configurations that might work, but we're going to continue looking at what is the best value and the best option. And we'll fine tune those details in the coming weeks. So then lastly, the final proposition that will be on the ballot related to transportation would be the GPS and telematics devices. So just as a reminder for what's on the proposition, this would be for a capital expenditure of $210,000. And it allows us to add not only the GPS devices, which is going to add efficiencies in how we oversee the fleet. It identifies where the buses are. It also helps us monitor safe driving behaviors. It shows the routes of where the buses are. And then it also flags any other issues that might require additional training or discussions with the drivers, and adds efficiencies for the daily vehicle inspection reports, which is all the data on the buses that we're required to track as part of the fleet maintenance and part of all of the DOT inspections. And then ultimately, it would have a parent app. So parents who are wondering if they've missed the stop or where is the bus, if they opt to participate in that, they would be able to see that information. And then one of the other key features of this is the tablets that are installed on the bus. And this is also going to be particularly helpful for the drivers, because not only does it call out the stop and route directions for the drivers, but it also has information on the students. So the student photos would be there. So think about it. If you're a sub driver and you're not familiar with who the students are, you have a way to verify that you have the right child on the right route and that they're getting on or off at the right stop as well. So we're pretty excited at the capabilities of the system, and this will be the third proposition. So if you scoot over to the next slide, this is just a quick summary of those propositions. So when we approved this proposition back in March, we weren't sure whether we were going to be able to get 9 electric buses or whether it would be 5 or fewer. So the way we structured the proposition was to put a maximum not to exceed amount for the 9 buses of $1,475,000. And that assumed 9 electric buses. So based on what we know now, we're optimistic and hopeful for getting the funding for the 5 electric buses. That would be at a cost of $163,574 per bus, plus 4 diesels at $124,000. So we would be spending about $1.3 million. So again, although we're authorized to spend the $1,475,000, we would only obviously spend what we need in order to buy what we've been approved for. Similarly, the charging infrastructure is a maximum amount, but if we can design it and bring it in below that, we will. And the GPS fleet app, that's a pretty solid price at $210,000. That has been pre-authorized by SED for state aid. And we have that available off of a state contract, so we don't need to do additional bidding on that. So the total anticipated expenditure, assuming we were to get the 5 electric buses awarded to us, or the 200,000 awarded to us, would be about $1.7 million. So under that total authorized expenditure. Okay. So that is the rapid update on buses. If I have any more information to report, I can include that as part of the budget update at the May 5th meeting, which is the public hearing on the budget. I will have the tentative tax rates for everybody at that meeting as well. And then since we have 2 candidates on the ballot, there should not be a Meet the Candidates night because there are no contested seats, and that is pursuant to the rules from the League of Women Voters. And then everything leads to May 18th, which will be the budget vote here at the high school from 7 to 9. Are there any questions on that update?
Judy, I have a quick question about the bus purchase proposition on the ballot itself. The public will be voting to approve up to 9 buses, regardless of whether they're electric or diesel, right? So we're asking them to approve a purchase, period, and then we will figure out what the makeup of those buses looks like.
Right. So again, as we've talked all along, the makeup of those buses is going to be completely dependent on the extent of funding that we qualify for with Nyserda. So fingers crossed, everybody, that we get the maximum for the 5 buses, and then that will be the plan.
Judy, have I know the federal programs have not been put together yet, but have you given any consideration that that the feds may do something similar to what Nyserda is doing, and it might pay to hold on to those, or consider at least holding on to those 2009 buses rather than scrapping them right away, to potentially have them if the feds go in a similar way?
We will be watching all of that. So if we get the 5 Nyserda buses, we must scrap 5 of the 09s. So again, we would have 4, and there's no harm in hanging on to them. We would just continue to drive them and wait and see if we can effectively cash them in to get that maximum grant funding.
Thank you.
We should have a mock Meet the Candidate night just for Willow, because I think it's completely unfair after last year. No, Willow?
Sure, I'm game. I think I've paid my dues though, Christine.
Yes.
I just would say this, that I would say that, to the people in the community that push for this, that there was a group of people that came to meetings, sent us emails, thank you. I was hesitant about this because the math to me didn't look like good math. It was like, wait a minute, this isn't going to work, but they were right. And this is a great example of, civics and participation in government right here, having citizens write to us and request something, and then a credit to Judy, who I'm sure over the last 6 months has learned more about electric buses than, most people on the continent. So I think it's just fantastic that it's worked out this way. I'm really excited about what we're doing. The only thing I just want to say is that like, there still are some final hurdles in terms of the grants and everything. And like, I want this to happen. I think all of us want this to happen. And we need to have these final steps. So I just don't want people to be disappointed if one of these steps doesn't happen, and people looking at the board going, well, why didn't this happen? Well, it's just, we still need the grant approval. We still need to make sure that the stuff with the electric, the plugins work, so there's still a couple of hurdles, and I want to get over them, but they're still there. We just need to have our fingers crossed.
Well, and
the other hurdle that needs to be done is the public has to vote for them. So all the people that wrote us, write your friends, talk to your neighbors, make a good decision. Because without you making good decision, we can't, our hands are tied.
Good point, Jonathan. Good point.
And I think the state is very excited about advancing this. I mean, this is clearly one of their goals, and they have been so helpful working with us. So Karim has been on the phone with them. I've been on the phone with them, and we've been answering their questions, and they've been guiding us along the way. So I'm optimistic. And again, I think you're right. There is momentum in the community. We could not have come this far with this program as rapidly as we did without the help of those community groups. And again, David Burtis and Joe Murray were going to seminars, webinars, feeding me information. There have been other people who have been reaching out. So it's not just in the Bethlehem Central School District. It is New York State and even beyond, where people are excited about this and really want to see it succeed. So the community will have their say, and hopefully we'll be able to deliver this. Okay, thank you all.
Judy, before we move on. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is our recognition of submitted public comment. We did have 2 comments that came into the board, and as usual, they will be attached to the minutes of the meeting so that everybody can see them. The first comment that came in from Andrew Sheehan had a number of questions about universal pre-K. And I know we're not planning on offering universal pre-K in the fall. Jody, I was hoping I could send this email to you and you could take a look at it and respond to the questions that are in there.
Sure, that's fine.
And then the second email that came in came from Teresa Foster, who had a couple of questions. One about why we are still using 6 feet for social distancing when CDC guidelines said 3 feet. And my understanding is that we are still considered high risk and so to comply with the 6-foot distance. And then she also had some questions about what we anticipate for the fall with respect to school. And of course, that is still work in progress. And I'm sure as soon as we have information to share, we'll be sharing that with the community. Next on the agenda, item 6, action items. A, finance action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following finance action items 1 through 3.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
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 Any abstentions? That carries. B, professional personnel action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following professional personnel action items 1 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Holly, we can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sort of.
Yeah.
We're up to C, support personnel action items, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, they're both 1 through 4, and I thought that I lost track. C, support personnel action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following support staff action items 1 through 4.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. D, other action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following action items 1 and 2.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. E, Capital Region BOCES Board Member Election 2021. It is recommended that the Board of Education vote on items 1 and 2 separately to elect up to 2 candidates on the ballot for board members of the Capital Region BOCES.
But there are only 2 members. There are only 2 people.
That's what I'm just looking at, and I'm seeing that there are only 2 people.
What's the matter with that? If they're unopposed, we're voting to approve them.
I just think that we could probably vote for both of them together at the same time instead of. So it is recommended that the Board of Education elect Brian Backus and Lynn Lenhart to be board members for Capital Region BOCES.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
Does Lynn have any experience in this?
Just a little, Chris.
Okay, just didn't know. Wanted to follow up.
Any opposed? I mean, sorry, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. F, 2021-2022 Capital Region BOCES Administrative Budget. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the administrative budget of the Capital Region BOCES.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
Yeah, I'd have a question. It says they're going to raise such sum by assessment. How much do we pay to BOCES for the assessment?
I have no idea what we
Yeah.
pay BOCES. Judy, do you?
I would have to look that up. Give me a minute and it's listed out in our detailed budget sheet. So let me see if I can pull that out quickly for you.
And Jonathan, remember, you're only voting actually on the administrative budget. There's a bunch of other components to the BOCES that we pay them.
Right, all the money that we pay them for all kinds of services.
Right.
It just seems that, every year we're asked to approve a budget and we have no say in putting it together or how it's really spent. And it's $12 million. And we probably, given the size of our district, I'm guessing we're probably paying 2 of that or more. I don't know.
I don't know if it's that high just for the administrative budget of it, but
It's a lot.
I don't know if you want to continue with other items while I'm looking and I'll let you know when I have it.
that's the last item.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think there's anything else.
Okay. I was thinking.
I apologize to everyone.
That's a good question, John.
I mean, I don't know that it's going to change anybody's vote, but I just think that, we should have some idea as to what portion of that, and then, maybe next year question them on, before we get to this point, on, what they're spending it on. I'd love to see their budget.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull up their newsletter that they shared with us. If you just give me a moment, it at least shares what each school district is contributing. It maybe goes into more detail as to how it's fully broken up, but just give me one moment to give you a visual on that.
Thank you, Brittany.
Sorry, give me one moment.
So we're paying more than Niskayuna and less than Schenectady or Shen. I guess $500,000 isn't bad if I only knew what it went to.
Got it. 377,000.
Uh-huh. And that's for last year?
That's
Or
for the 21-22 budget.
21-22. And
Next
they're
year.
saying they're looking at 531 in this.
And there's also a facility, there's like a capital component charge, which is separate. I'm wondering if they've
Okay.
combined that.
So that's,
Jonathan, is both administrative and capital assessment.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
That particular chart that we were just looking at was both administrative and a capital assessment. So it's
Okay.
larger than just the administrative assessment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's 176 for the capital piece. Okay.
Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. Item 7, future meetings and events. Our next regular board meeting is on Wednesday, May 5th, anticipating executive session starting at 6 and public session starting at 7 o'clock. As mentioned, there is not a need for the Meet the Candidates event on Wednesday, May 12th. Tuesday, May 18th from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. will be the 2021-2022 budget vote and annual election. And then the board meeting after that will be on Wednesday, May 19th. Again, anticipating an executive session at 6 and meeting starting at 7. And then the meeting after that is on Wednesday, June 2nd, starting at 7, anticipating executive session at 6. And it looks like on Monday, June 7th at 5:30, there is an audit committee meeting. Seeing no need to go back into executive session, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Okay.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And bye.
Adjourned. Thanks, everybody.